If you scroll through social media right now, you are probably less than 3 swipes away from some fitness influencer promising to completely transform your body in like 15 minutes a day.
Oh, absolutely. It's everywhere.
Right. It is completely the era of fast fitness.
Mm.
I mean, everything is optimized, it's bite-sized, it's instantly consumable. But when you look at true, lasting physical disciplines, you start to realize that real expertise doesn't work like a viral video.
No, it really doesn't.
It works a lot more like a vintage wine. So today, we are cracking open the cellar on a 40-year-old fitness methodology. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring a really rigorous qualitative analysis of STOTT Pilates.
Specifically looking at how this method is embodied by Caroline Berger de Fémynie.
Exactly. She's the founder of BioPilates Paris and the creator of the BioPilates Deep Dive audio series. And our mission today is to unpack this intense tension between preserving a really strict historical tradition and, adapting to cutting-edge modern biomechanics.
And exploring why moving your body correctly is actually considered an ethical responsibility, which is a wild concept.
It is. So let's just dive right in. The central theme in our source material is this idea of a DNA of excellence.
Yeah, that's what the researchers call it. And to really understand that DNA, we actually have to go back to the 1980s.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So that is when Moira Merrithew and her collaborators took the original archival movement repertoire that was created by Joseph Pilates, and they fundamentally updated its operating system.
Meaning they didn't just copy what he did.
Right, exactly. They didn't just preserve the original exercises like artifacts in a museum. They subjected them to intense sports medicine and rehabilitative science.
Wow.
Yeah, they collaborated with physical therapists and biomechanists. The goal was to shift the focus from simply mimicking a physical shape to actually understanding the structural internal mechanics required to perform that shape safely.
Which perfectly brings up this great quote in our sources from Jim Heidenreich. He's the CEO of Merrithew.
Oh, the vintage wine quote.
Yes. He argues that you simply cannot superficially duplicate 40 years of accumulated lived experience.
You really can't.
So let's unpack this for a second. It really is like trying to forge a vintage wine by just, mixing grape juice and alcohol in a laboratory.
Right.
Like, you can print a fake label, you can pour it into the exact same shape of bottle, but you absolutely cannot fake the aging process. The molecular complexity, the way the tannins break down and interact with the wood over decades, it just isn't there in the counterfeit.
And the counterfeit in this fitness scenario would be a newly minted, weekend-certified instructor.
Right. Somebody just took a quick online course.
Exactly. They might be able to demonstrate the outward choreography of a Pilates exercise perfectly. They can put on the label, so to speak.
But they don't have the tannins.
Right. What they lack is that underlying biological and historical architecture that makes the movement therapeutic rather than destructive. I mean, the 40-year incubation period of this method created a highly specific blueprint for the human body.
So let's actually look at that blueprint. If we were to put this DNA of excellence under a microscope, what are the actual tangible building blocks? How is it instructing us to build and align the body?
Well, if we view the body as a structural architecture, we obviously have to start with the foundation.
Makes sense.
In the STOTT paradigm, that means the lower extremity alignment. So we're talking the feet, the ankles, the knees, and the hips. And what is fascinating here is how often this is completely ignored in generic fitness classes.
Oh, totally. You hear Pilates and you immediately think, okay, core work.
Exactly. People completely forget their legs. But the method views the body as a continuous kinetic chain from the floor up.
Okay, give me a real-world scenario of what that actually looks like when someone is working out. Like, how does a foot position change a core exercise?
Okay, let's say you are lying on your back doing a classic abdominal curl, just a standard crunch.
Got it.
If you aren't paying attention to your foundation, your feet might roll outward slightly, just a tiny bit.
It's naturally relaxing them.
Right. But that seemingly minor shift in your ankle changes the rotation of your tibia, your shin bone, which then alters the tracking of your kneecap.
Oh, wow.
Which then changes the precise rotation of your femur, your thigh bone, inside the hip socket. And here's the kicker. Because the hip flexor muscles attach directly to your lumbar spine, that slight outward roll of your foot just forcibly pulled your lower back out of alignment right as you started loading it with an abdominal crunch.
That is why.
It's a massive chain reaction.
So a lazy ankle basically cascades upward and sabotages the lower back.
Exactly.
Okay, so if the legs and hips are the foundation, what are the load-bearing walls of this architectural blueprint?
That would be the alignment of the pelvis and the rib cage. The method actually utilizes two distinct pelvic placements. You have neutral and you have imprinted.
Neutral being, like your natural posture.
Yeah. Finding anatomical neutral alignment means balancing the pelvis so the natural shock-absorbing curve of the lower back is present. That minimizes joint stress, and it optimizes the efficiency of all the surrounding muscles.
But the sources also talk pretty heavily about the imprinted position. If neutral is the ideal, why do we need an imprint?
Because the ideal isn't always safe. An imprinted position is a slight posterior pelvic tilt. So you're essentially engaging the obliques to gently pull the pelvis backward.
When would you actually use that?
It is used specifically when a practitioner's core isn't strong enough to hold a neutral spine while both feet are lifted off the ground.
Right, because the legs are heavy.
Very heavy. Without the imprint, the sheer weight of the legs would cause hyperlordosis, which is that extreme, really painful arching of the lower back. So the imprint is basically a biomechanical safety net.
Okay, and sitting right above that safety net is the rib cage. I feel like this is where people who sit hunched over keyboards all day, like me, really run into trouble.
Oh, definitely. The rib cage is a massive biomechanical crossroads. It bridges your breathing, your shoulder alignment, and your global posture. If your rib cage is thrusting forward, which happens a lot when people try to, quote-unquote, stand up straight, you lose the stability of your trunk entirely.
So how do you fix it?
Well, to stabilize that entire load-bearing structure, the method relies on a very specific type of breathing. And this isn't just breathing to oxygenate the blood, it is conscious diaphragmatic breathing that's used as a motor lever.
Okay, unpack that mechanism for me. How does a breath act as a motor lever?
So when you inhale deeply into the sides and the back of the rib cage, and then you exhale with control, you are actively managing what is called intra-abdominal pressure.
Like pressurizing a cabin.
Exactly like that.
Yeah.
The diaphragm at the top, the pelvic floor at the bottom, and the deep transversus abdominis muscle wrapping around the middle, they all contract together to create a literal pressurized cylinder of support for your spine.
Which is the actual powerhouse.
Yes, that cylinder is the true powerhouse. It synchronizes the entire neuromuscular system. It braces the spine a fraction of a second before your limbs actually start moving.
So you have this pressurized cylinder stabilizing the center, which I guess brings us to the upper structure, like the roof of the house.
The shoulders and the neck.
Right. This involves scapular or shoulder blade, stabilization, and the alignment of the cervical and thoracic spine. Now, my immediate assumption when I hear shoulder stabilization is just good old-fashioned military posture. Just pin your shoulders back and down as hard as you can.
Which is a massive misconception.
Really?
Doing that will actually trap the joint. True scapular stability in this method is about active mobilization, not rigidity.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, your shoulder blade has to glide in a complex, three-dimensional range of motion across the back of your rib cage. It's called scapulohumeral rhythm.
That sounds complicated.
It is. If you pin the scapula down, you destroy that rhythm.
Okay.
And that forces the really delicate rotator cuff muscles to overwork and eventually tear.
Yuck.
So stability here means the ability to smoothly synchronize the shoulder blade with the movement of the arm while dynamically distributing all those mechanical forces.
And the neck, the cervical spine, has to adapt to those same forces.
Right, exactly. Your cervical spine shouldn't be rigidly locked in place either. It acts as a dynamic shock absorber. The alignment of your head has to constantly shift to accommodate the mechanical constraints of whatever your trunk and arms are doing.
Okay, let me just pause here. Because I am trying to put myself in the shoes of someone walking into a studio for the first time.
It's a lot.
It's a ton. If I'm a student, you're telling me I have to consciously monitor the femoral rotation in my hip socket, maintain a pressurized diaphragmatic cylinder, choose between a neutral or imprinted pelvis, ensure my rib cage isn't popping forward, actively glide my shoulder blades, and dynamically absorb shock with my neck. All simultaneously.
Yes.
Just to do a single repetition of an exercise.
Pretty much. It represents a staggering cognitive load. It demands a profound level of proprioception, which is your brain's awareness of your body in three-dimensional space.
But wait, so if I'm just trying to do a basic core movement, isn't that totally overwhelming? That level of complexity completely changes the role of the person at the front of the room.
It changes everything about teaching.
Right. Because if a student is trying to juggle all those biomechanical cues, their mental bandwidth is entirely maxed out. They can't possibly know if they're doing it right, which means the instructor can't just be a cheerleader counting out repetitions. They have to be a protector.
And that realization is the exact pivot point of our source material. When the physical mechanism is that complex and the student is that cognitively overloaded, teaching ceases to be a mere transfer of athletic information.
What does it become?
It becomes a moral mandate. The research shifts from the science of biomechanics to what it calls the ethics of care.
Okay, I have to push back a little on the terminology there. Ethics feels like an incredibly heavy word to apply to a fitness class. I mean, we use that word for doctors and lawyers. Why elevate a Pilates instructor to that level of moral responsibility?
Well, we elevate it because of the vulnerability of the practitioner. You have to remember, many people seek out this highly specific 40-year-old method precisely because they are in chronic pain, or they're recovering from surgery, or dealing with severe structural imbalances.
Okay, fair point.
So if a teacher fails to observe that slight inward collapse of a knee, or fails to notice a client thrusting their rib cage to compensate for a weak shoulder, they aren't just providing a subpar workout.
They're actually doing damage.
They are actively reinforcing destructive movement patterns that will cause physical harm. In this context, protecting the client's physical integrity is absolutely an ethical obligation.
So what does that ethics of care actually look like in practice?
It demands intense empathy and visual vigilance. An ethical instructor doesn't just watch the gross movement, they look for micro-compensations.
Like the tiny ankle roll.
Exactly. And more importantly, it requires precise, respectful manual adjustments. The instructor has to constantly adapt that incredibly rigid historical biomechanical blueprint to the living, breathing, uniquely flawed human body lying on the mat in front of them.
But observing someone's physical empathy in a studio is completely subjective, right? Anyone can claim their studio has an ethical foundation in their marketing brochures. To actually prove that this ethics of care is a foundational reality and not just a sales pitch, the researchers had to turn the spoken words of Caroline Berger de Fémynie into hard data.
And the methodology they used to do that is just fascinating. They applied a qualitative content analysis using specialized academic software.
Specifically NVivo and MXQDA, right?
Yes. And they used it to study her written articles, her interviews, and the actual transcripts of her BioPilates Deep Dive audio series.
Here is where it gets really interesting to me. It's like they created a heat map of her brain through her vocabulary. But how does that software actually work? It isn't just giving you a word count, right?
Oh no, a simple word count would be useless. The software maps the semantic networks and the proximity of phrases. It looks for thematic coding.
What does that mean in this context?
For example, it analyzes what concepts Caroline naturally groups together when she speaks spontaneously. The algorithms revealed that whenever she talked about a mechanical concept, like spring tension or adjusting a client, she almost never linked those phrases to aesthetic goals.
Like burning calories or getting toned.
Exactly.
So what did she link them to?
She consistently linked them to nodes of meaning around movement quality, protection, and bodily responsibility.
Well,
The software proved that this moral framework is hardwired into her linguistic architecture. Her pedagogical strategy is a constant, deliberate balancing act between respecting the stripped historical tradition of the COTT technique and empathetically addressing the immediate, fragile needs of her clients.
she views the body not as a machine to be optimized, but as a complex entity deserving of deep respect. But that entire philosophy, the careful linguistic cues, the reading of microcompensations, those empathetic manual adjustments, all of that relies entirely on in-person human connection.
It does.
Which puts this 40-year-old methodology on a massive collision course with the modern world. I mean, what happens when this deeply tactile, historically rooted practice crashes headfirst into the digital age?
It creates a severe digital dilemma. The sources warn heavily against the current fragmentation of the Pilates market.
How so?
While on one side you have the rapid proliferation of fast-track online certifications, and those completely strip away the incubation period required to learn those complex biomechanics we talked about.
Right, the vintage wine becomes cheap grape juice.
Exactly. And then on the other side, you have an influx of consumer technology, remote virtual training, fitness apps, and artificial intelligence posture analysis software.
Okay, let's play devil's advocate for a second here. If biomechanics is ultimately just physics and geometry, angles of the femur, tracking of the kneecap, shouldn't AI actually be better at this than a human?
In what way?
Well, like a high-end motion sensor or a VR headset. could give you perfectly precise real-time feedback on your pelvic tilt without any margin of human error.
That is a really common argument. And yes, a motion sensor can absolutely calculate the angle of your pelvis with perfect geometric precision. But an AI sees geometry. It does not see trauma.
Oh, wow.
The danger highlighted in the research is that relying purely on technological feedback severs the practitioner from the intuitive human touch of an expert.
Because it can't read the context.
Right. An app might tell you your thoracic spine is locked, but it cannot read the fatigue in your eyes. It cannot understand that you are subconsciously guarding your lower back because of an emotional stressor you experienced that morning.
That makes so much sense.
It cannot provide the gentle, reassuring tactile cue on your shoulder that actively signals your sympathetic nervous system to release a muscle spasm.
So the technology has the mechanics, but it entirely lacks the morality. It has no capacity for the ethics of care.
Exactly. And that digital dilution threatens to reduce a holistic living heritage into a sterile mechanical routine.
So how does a discipline like this survive?
Yeah.
Does it just reject modern technology entirely and lock itself away as an isolated, purist practice?
No, because isolation usually leads to irrelevance. The researchers advocate for what they call a dynamic co-construction of knowledge.
Meaning what, practically?
Technology must be utilized as a powerful supplement, but never as a substitute. The preservation of this DNA of excellence relies on a multidisciplinary approach.
Meaning the modern instructor doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Correct. The best practitioners partner with physiotherapists, neuroscientists, and ergonomists. They absolutely utilize new technologies to gather better data and understand the body more deeply.
But they filter it.
Yes. They filter all of that rigid data through the empathetic, ethical lens of a human teacher. That is how a movement method updates its operating system for the modern era without losing its original soul. It becomes a continuous, evolving conversation rather than just a rigid, top-down dogma.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Whether you were trying to find a good movement class to rehab an injury, or simply trying to navigate a world that pushes fast, cheap solutions for everything, how do you actually apply this?
It fundamentally changes what you look for in an expert.
Right. You shouldn't be looking for someone who just counts repetitions or a slick app that gamifies your progress. You need to look for teachers and professionals who prioritize the why over the what. Seek out the people who possess the skill to adapt their knowledge to your specific, asymmetrical, beautifully flawed reality, rather than forcing you into a standardized mold.
You have to look for the undeniable presence of that ethics of care.
Exactly.
We started this deep dive contrasting the illusion of fast fitness with the reality of an aged, vintage expertise. And the core takeaway here is that true expertise is a living heritage.
It's not static.
Right. It requires a delicate, relentless balance. You must maintain a profound respect for the historical blueprint, embrace the intense moral responsibility of guiding another human being, and remain willing to continuously adapt to new science.
It is an incredible standard to strive for.
It is. And it leaves us with a provocative thought to carry forward.
Let's hear it.
We have spent this time analyzing the physical empathy required to align a spine and the battle to preserve human touch in a digital age. But think about your own professional or personal expertise. As our world digitizes and automates faster than ever, what is the DNA of your own skill set?
Oh, that's a great question.
And more importantly, how are you ensuring that as you innovate, you aren't losing the fundamental ethics of care that make your work uniquely human?
Wow. That is a question we are all going to have to sit with. You can forge the label, but you can never fake the care that goes into the vintage. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep digging deeper into the world around you.